Virgo, your enemies are crying. What will come to you this weekend will be a great victory. There's a type of victory that doesn't make a sound before it arrives. It doesn't warn you. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't appear in the form of applause. It arrives like a silence that changes temperature. And what if I told you that this weekend is exactly that kind of turning point for you, Virgo? Not the flashy turning point that everyone notices from afar. The other one. The one that only those who have suffered through the entire process can feel coming. You know the feeling of doing everything right and still being treated as if you were failing, of delivering far more than asked and still hearing between the lines that it wasn't enough. This isn't your imagination. This has a name, and that name is about to turn against those who doubted you. For months, maybe years, you held back things that no one saw. You adjusted details that went unnoticed. You corrected mistakes that almost no one even noticed. And while you did all this in silence, someone, somewhere, decided that you were too small to be taken seriously. They decided they could ignore you, test you, put you aside because they thought you wouldn't notice. Or worse, they thought that even if they did notice, you wouldn't have the courage to respond. There's something no one told you about crying from anger. Sometimes anger isn't the real reason. Sometimes it's just the mask a person wears when they realize, too late, that they were completely wrong about someone. And that's exactly what some people around you are about to feel this weekend, Virgo, only they don't know it yet. What follows explains exactly why this is happening now and why these tears, when they come, will mean much more than they seem at first glance. There's something that those who underestimate you never understood about Virgo. You don't hold grudges like you hold poison. You hold onto them like you hold onto evidence. Every detail, every poorly chosen phrase, every broken promise becomes an organized, dated file within you, waiting for the right moment. And that moment isn't about revenge. It's about truth finally being brought to light. There's something curious about Virgos that almost no one notices from the outside. You never needed anyone to believe in you to keep working. That scares the wrong people, who are used to dealing with people who give up when they're not applauded. You're not like that. You kept delivering even when no one applauded, even when they didn't seem to notice you were there. And that's why when the result finally appears, it appears whole, without cracks, because it was built brick by brick, without haste, without the spotlight. There's also a detail you may never have stopped to name. The people who underestimated you the most didn't do it by accident. They did it because somehow they felt they needed to diminish you to feel bigger. This doesn't speak to you. It speaks to the size of the fear they carry. And when that fear finds concrete proof that it was wrong, it doesn't disappear silently. It becomes visible discomfort. It becomes strange behavior. It often becomes tears disguised as anger. This weekend, something you've been building in silence will come out into the open. It could be a conversation that changes direction without you forcing anything. It could be a result that arrives just when someone was betting on your failure. It could simply be the feeling in your chest that the tables have turned and no one can deny it anymore. And the people who doubted you, who underestimated you, who thought your silent surrender was a sign of weakness, will feel this in a way they may not even be able to explain properly. An unease, a discomfort that doesn't have an exact name. Because deep down, they always knew they were wrong about you. They just didn't expect the proof to come so quickly, so clearly, so impossible to ignore. But before I tell you exactly what's about to move, I need to ask you a question you may never have allowed yourself to answer honestly. What do you do when you finally prove you were right all along? All this time, even when no one else believed in it. That question carries the weight of everything you've endured alone until now. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose talks about that moment when Virgo stops chasing a perfection that no one will recognize and begins to build internally a clarity that doesn't depend on external approval. It's not about getting everything right. It's about stopping blaming yourself for not having solved alone what was never solely your responsibility. The book translates in simple language the pattern that governs your sign and shows how to transform this internal demand into direction. You're processing a lot right now, recognizing patterns within yourself that may have always existed but never had a name. This discomfort that's still active isn't a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is about to change, and the body feels it before the mind understands. It's precisely at this point that it's worth acting, while this clarity is still fresh, before routine convinces you to push everything back into the depths. The link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And tell me in the comments, when was the last time you proved you were right, even without anyone apologizing for doubting you? There's an image that perfectly describes the paradox that Virgo carries, even without knowing how to name it. It's as if you were, at the same time, the surgeon and the patient of your own life. No one else sees with such precision where the problems are, where the flaws are, where something needs to be adjusted. This surgical gaze is your greatest talent. The problem is when it turns exclusively inward, and you become at the same time the one who cuts and the one who bleeds. You don't want revenge at all. This is important to say, because many people confuse what's coming with a desire for revenge, and that's not it. What you really want is much simpler and much harder to admit. You want to be seen. You want someone to finally look at everything you've silently given away and say, without you having to ask, I saw, I always saw, and I took too long to say it. This is the paradox that no one taught you to deal with. You were trained throughout your life not to need external recognition to feel valid. You learned that asking to be seen sounded like weakness, like neediness, like something a competent person shouldn't feel. So you buried this need so deeply that you almost forgot it existed. But it never went away. It just waited patiently for the right moment to be recognized without you having to beg for it. And that's exactly the mechanism behind the turnaround that's coming. It's not about you changing who you are. It's about the world around you finally achieving the same clarity you've had about yourself for a long time. The surgeon, finally, also receives care. The one who always cared for others, finally, is cared for in return. And when that happens, it's not a reason for empty pride, but for a profound, almost physical relief, as if a muscle you didn't even know was tense could finally relax. There's a dam that holds back an entire river without anyone on the other side realizing the pressure inside. From the outside, everything seems calm. The water doesn't overflow, doesn't make a sound, doesn't give any warning. But inside, each drop that arrives adds to the previous one, and the structure sustains a weight that grows silently, day after day. You have been that dam for a long time, holding back emotions, holding back unacknowledged work, holding back the urge to scream that this isn't fair, while on the outside you maintain an impeccable, organized, controlled surface. Think about how many times you swallowed a response that would have put someone in their place just to keep the peace. Think about how many times you corrected someone else's mistake without demanding recognition because it seemed easier to resolve than to argue. Each of those times didn't disappear. They accumulated layer upon layer, forming an internal structure that no one else can see, but that you feel every time you take a deep breath before calmly responding to something that didn't deserve any calm at all. The problem is that the dam doesn't hold water forever. At some point, the internal pressure finds a crack, a fissure, a point where the structure simply can no longer pretend that everything is all right. And what happens when that finally gives way isn't destruction, it's liberation. It's the strength you've been holding back turning into movement, turning into results, turning into something that no one else can hold back or deny anymore. The people on the other side of that dam, who built their lives trusting that you would never release that water, will feel the impact of this in a way they may not even fully understand. Because they never imagined that the quiet, discreet virgin, always willing to adjust, could hold so much pent-up force, and when that force finally finds its way, it doesn't ask permission to happen. It simply follows the course that has always been rightfully hers, rearranging everything that was out of place, including the people who have become accustomed to occupying spaces that should never have been theirs. That pent-up force you've held back for so long doesn't have to remain just instinct. It can become a clear direction, a path you understand and choose, instead of simply feeling the pressure without knowing what to do with it. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, shows exactly how Virgo transforms this contained energy into true discernment, instead of letting everything explode uncontrollably, or worse, continuing to swallow it in silence. It's about releasing pent-up energy with purpose, not with chaos. The last copies are going out quickly, and this is the kind of content that usually disappears from the internet without warning. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's a phenomenon in the ocean that no one controls, but that everyone can predict if they know how to observe. The tide always turns, without exception, even when it seems like it will stay low forever. And while the water is low, those on the beach forget that it will return. They build castles too close to the waterline. They leave things scattered where it was once safe. They settle into the illusion that that low level is permanent. That's exactly what happened to those who saw you as someone easy to ignore. They built their security on your low tide, that period when you were quiet, processing, absorbing more than giving back. They interpreted your silence as a lack of strength. They confused your patience with a lack of boundaries, and they settled in without realizing that no tide stays low forever. It's curious how the people who invested the least time in truly getting to know you are almost always the ones who feel they have the most definitive opinion about who you are. They saw a snapshot, a phase, a moment of retreat, and decided that was the whole picture. They never asked what was behind that retreat. They never imagined that perhaps you were just gathering strength, like water receding from the shore before returning with everything it took with it and then some. Now the water is returning, and it doesn't give polite warnings. It simply rises, reclaims every inch of land it had ceded, and takes with it everything that was built without respect for its time. You don't need to chase after anything. You just need to let the tide do what the tide has always done, return exactly to where it has always rightfully belonged. People who have become complacent in their lack of reaction will feel the water coming before they understand why. And the reason, deep down, is simple. You never stopped growing. You were just, for a time, contained. And what was contained, when it finally expands, usually occupies a much larger space than anyone expected. The tide is turning for you now, but there's a difference between instinctively feeling the water rising and knowing what to do with the reclaimed ground. It's one thing to realize the moment has arrived. It's quite another to occupy that space without diminishing yourself again afterward. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, exists for this moment, when the emotional shift has already begun and Virgo needs clarity so as not to waste this newly recovered strength on doubt. This content will not be available indefinitely. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. There's a type of door that stays locked, not because someone slammed it shut, but because over time no one has tried to open it. The hinges rust, the lock jams, and everyone around starts to believe that's just how that door is, that it always has been, that it always will be, until someone, one day, decides to turn the doorknob with just the right force, at the right angle, and the door, which seemed welded shut, simply gives way. You are that door for many people who know you. At some point, they decided they already knew everything about you, that you were predictable, controllable, always willing to adjust, always willing to give space. They locked that idea about you away and never tried to turn the doorknob again. And that's exactly why, when the door finally opens and reveals something completely different from what they expected, the impact is disproportionate. Because they weren't prepared for any other version of you besides the one that remained frozen in their minds. There's a huge difference between being underestimated due to inattention and being underestimated out of convenience. Most people who put you in a small box did so because it was convenient for them. It was easier to deal with a version of you that didn't question, that didn't grow, that didn't change position. A version of you in motion would require them to move as well, and few people like being forced to catch up on someone they preferred to keep static inside their own head. And here's the real mechanism behind the tears that are about to appear. They're not crying because they've lost something material. They're crying because the image they've built of you, the image they used to feel safe, to feel superior, to justify how they treated you, is crumbling before their eyes. And there's nothing more destabilizing than discovering that the person you underestimated always had control of the situation. This is the real turning point this weekend. It's not about you changing. It's about them finally seeing what's always been there. Hidden behind a door they themselves decided never to try to open again. Seeing what has always been there requires a kind of courage that no one taught you to have. The courage to stop doubting your own perception just because others took a long time to validate it. That's exactly what the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose helps Virgos develop: confidence in their own interpretation of reality, without needing external approval to know they were right all along. It's about unlocking that door from the inside, even before anyone on the outside notices. Many people who have felt the impact of this text so far will close this tab and forget about it in 5 minutes. Don't be that person. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. There's an old two-pan balance that only finds equilibrium when the weight on each side is finally acknowledged. For too long, one pan of your life has been heavier, the pan of giving, of adjusting, of correcting, of supporting things that weren't solely yours to support. And the other pan, the one of receiving recognition, of being seen for what you truly deliver, has remained empty for far too long. This doesn't mean you did anything wrong by giving so much of yourself. It simply means that, for a long time, no one put the equivalent weight on the other side. And an unbalanced scale cannot correct itself alone, no matter how much time passes. It needs someone at some point to recognize the imbalance and make the necessary correction. Sometimes this correction comes from the outside, in the form of belated recognition. Sometimes it comes from within, in the form of you yourself deciding that you will no longer accept carrying alone what has always been shared. This weekend isn't about revenge. Revenge weighs the scales wrong again, in the opposite direction, and deep down, you never wanted that. What's coming is balance. It's the scale finally finding its resting point without you needing to push anything forcefully. The approaching victory doesn't look like a speech, public applause, or spectacular revenge. It looks like relief, like someone finally saying aloud what you've known about yourself for a long time. And perhaps that's the most beautiful truth about being a Virgo. You never needed anyone to confirm your worth to continue giving your best. But when that confirmation arrives, even late, even through the tears of those who doubted, it doesn't complete you. It only confirms what you already were: whole, alone, all along. The people who cried will go their own way, carrying the lesson that only time can teach. And you will go yours, a little lighter, knowing that the patience that seemed like weakness was, from the beginning, the most silent form of strength that exists. In the end, perhaps Virgo's greatest victory is never the one others loudly applaud, but rather the one felt alone, quietly, in your heart, when you finally stop needing to prove anything to anyone. Like a lighthouse that never moves to prove its existence, it simply keeps shining, night after night, until even the densest fog realizes there's nowhere left to escape the light. You've always been that lighthouse. You were just waiting for the right fog to remind the whole world of it.